Hi, Donna's Therapeutic Yoga. Welcome. So in this clip I'm just going to show you a simple way that at home you can start to bring balance to the pelvis and the leg bones. And basically that the bones and the hip joint itself can start to gain greater proprioception or awareness of the pieces and how the forces of gravity are going through them. So what you're going to need is a folded blanket or a pressed foam block, okay? And then a couple of extras that you could have but aren't necessary is a 3-inch foam block and a sandbag, okay? So if you don't have an actual yoga sandbag, the magic bags that you heat up in the microwave, it's got a bit of weight and is long enough, depending on the one you have, that could work as well, okay? So what you're going to do is set yourself up so that your knees are at 90 degrees, as well as the hip joint is at 90. Okay, so that we start to feel the femur bones settling into the hip socket. And then what you're going to do is either take your pressed foam block or your blanket, and you're going to lift your hips up and bring that underneath you so that your pelvis is completely supported by the block. Okay? If the block is too much, then you're going to substitute the block with a folded blanket or towel. Okay? Just feeling your feet on the wall, and then just enjoy some easy breaths here. I want you to imagine that you can actually sense the inhale in the spaces between the bones and the muscle and tissue of the pelvis and the femurs. And that as you exhale, you actually feel the front of the hip crease just kind of soften. So inhaling, imagine that breath going into the spaces between the bones and the tissue and muscle of the pelvis. And as you exhale, just a softening in front of that hip crease. So if you're not having a really clear sense of feeling the weight of the leg bones and feeling the femur in the hip socket, you can use a block, and you're just going to place it between the knees. Okay, and just having that awareness of the femur bones by holding the block between the knees can change how the femurs settle into the pelvis. Okay, so you can play with placing a block at the knees. And with each exhale, just feeling a settling in the front of the hip and the femurs themselves into the hip socket. The other thing you can play with is with the sandbag. You can place it right in at the hip crease. Now, for some people, you want it on the bones of the pelvis, so you might need to have your hands there, because if I let go of mine, it rolls onto my abdomen, and we don't want it on the tissue of the abdomen. We actually want it localized onto the bones of the pelvis. So this is one option, and if it's not staying there for you, then another option is to bring it just below the knees. So it's resting on the shins. And again, if adding the block or adding the sandbag either has a sense of being disruptive, being that there isn't the sense of settling into the pelvis, of your tissue and your nervous system just kind of quieting down, you want to remove that prop. So for me today, that sandbag's going to come off. And the hands can be at your side, palms up. They can be palms down. They can be resting on the belly. We're just inhaling, feeling the space between the bones and the muscle, the tissue of the pelvis. And as you exhale, just a settling at the front of the hip crease. The next 3 breaths, just sensing the space of the pelvic floor between the pubic bone and the tailbone. And then for your next 3 breaths, just sensing the space of the pelvic floor, sit bone to sit bone. And just feeling more and more of the weight of the legs and the pelvis onto the block or the floated blanket. And then with your next 3 breaths, just sensing a triangle in the space between the pubic bone and the right sit bone, and the right sit bone and the tailbone, and the tailbone and the left sit bone, and the left sit bone and the pubic bone. And just feeling the inhale and the exhale between the 4 points, that diamond of the pelvic floor. And then you're going to take the block out if you have one between your knees. And you're going to bring your feet actually to the floor. And you're going to lift your hips. Take the block out. Bring your hips back to the floor and bring your feet onto the wall. And just notice how that has changed. And you could be in that constructive rest position with your feet on the wall, the block or a blanket underneath the pelvis for 5 to 10 minutes. And ideally you would want to do that maybe to start your day or at some point in the middle of the day to break up having been seated at the computer. And that will start to bring a better relating of the femurs to the pelvis and of the pelvis to the femurs. And then after you did that constructive rest position, you could go back to, if you wanted to, just trying to lift the leg, the foot off the floor and bring the leg into flexion and see if anything had changed. And likely you're going to notice some changes just in when you first came into position to going through some breathing and just letting yourself settle to when you come off the block. But that can start to bring a better relationship between the legs and the pelvis, and then also the pelvis and the spine and the pelvis and the ribcage. So play with that, enjoy that for the next month. If you've got questions as you're doing that, fire them off to me at yogadon@shaw.ca. I'm happy to answer them if I can, and if it's something more in depth, we can always schedule a session to look specifically at what's going on for you in your body. Okay. Namaste.